A soothing journey through the 19th century. Welcome to a peaceful journey through one of history's most fascinating eras. The Victorian period, spanning from 1837 to 1901, was a time of remarkable transformation, innovation, and cultural richness. As we explore together, let yourself relax. There's no need to remember every detail. Simply allow these stories from the past to wash over you like gentle waves, carrying you to another time, another world. Take a deep breath. Settle in. And let's step back into the gaslit streets and grand ballrooms of Victorian England. Queen Victoria's extraordinary reign. Queen Victoria ascended to the throne on June 20, 1837, at just 18 years old. She would reign for an impressive 63 years and 7 months, making her the longest reigning British monarch until Queen Elizabeth II surpassed her record. Victoria was only 5 feet tall, yet her presence was commanding. She inherited the throne because her father's 3 older brothers had no legitimate surviving children. On the morning she learned she would become queen, she was awakened at 6 o'clock and descended the stairs in her nightgown to meet the officials who brought the news. Her reign gave its name to an entire era, one that would see Britain transform from a largely agricultural society into the world's first industrial superpower. The Victorian age would become synonymous with both progress and propriety, innovation and tradition. Victoria herself was a woman of contradictions. She loved dancing and parties in her youth, yet became the embodiment of strict moral values. She adored her husband Albert deeply, and when he died in 1861, she wore black mourning clothes for the remaining 40 years of her life. The Great Exhibition of 1851. In 1851, London hosted the Great Exhibition in the specially constructed Crystal Palace in Hyde Park. This was the world's first international exposition, and it was a spectacular showcase of industrial achievement and human ingenuity. The Crystal Palace itself was a marvel of engineering, a massive structure of cast iron and plate glass, covering an area of over 990,000 square feet. It was designed by Joseph Paxton, who drew inspiration from the lily pads of water lilies, noticing how the radiating ribs of the leaves provided structural support. Over 6 million people visited the exhibition during its 5-month run, a staggering number considering Britain's population was only about 20 million at the time. Visitors could see over 100,000 objects from around the world, including the Koh-i-Noor diamond, the largest diamond known at that time. The exhibition made a profit of £186,000, which was used to establish several museums in South Kensington, including what would become the Victoria and Albert Museum. Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's beloved husband, was the driving force behind the exhibition, envisioning it as a celebration of human achievement and international cooperation. Victorian homes and gaslighting. The Victorian home underwent a dramatic transformation during this era. At the beginning of Victoria's reign, most homes were lit by candles and oil lamps. By the end, gas lighting had become common in middle-class homes, and electric lighting was beginning to appear. Gas lighting created a warm, amber glow that we now associate with the Victorian aesthetic. However, it also produced fumes and heat, requiring careful ventilation. Gas mantles, introduced in the 1880s, made gas lighting much more efficient and brighter. Victorian interiors were notably cluttered by modern standards. The middle and upper classes filled their homes with heavy furniture, thick draperies, ornate wallpaper, and countless decorative objects. This wasn't merely aesthetic, it was a display of wealth and taste. Every surface held meaning. Whatnot shelves displayed curiosities from travels, while parlor tables overflowed with photograph albums, shell collections, and wax flowers under glass domes. The Victorians believed that bare walls and empty spaces indicated poverty or poor breeding. A properly decorated home demonstrated not only wealth but also cultural refinement and moral character. The Victorian postal system. In 1840, the penny post revolutionized communication. For just 1 penny, anyone could send a letter anywhere in the United Kingdom. This was the brainchild of Rowland Hill, who introduced the world's first adhesive postage stamp, the penny black, featuring Queen Victoria's profile. Before this reform, the recipient of a letter typically paid the postage, and the cost depended on distance and the number of sheets. This made correspondence expensive and cumbersome. The penny post democratized written communication, and letter writing became a central part of Victorian life. People wrote letters constantly. Multiple times a day wasn't unusual for the upper classes. The mail was delivered frequently, sometimes up to 12 times a day in London. You could mail a letter in the morning and receive a reply the same afternoon. The Victorians developed elaborate rules around correspondence. Black-edged mourning stationery indicated bereavement, with the width of the black border signifying how recent the loss. Love letters were treasured and often tied with ribbon. The art of letter writing was considered essential to being a cultured person. Victorian fashion and the crinoline. Victorian fashion was dramatic, elaborate, and constantly evolving. In the 1850s and 1860s, the crinoline became the defining silhouette for women. This cage-like structure made of steel hoops held skirts out to enormous widths, sometimes up to 6 feet in diameter. While crinolines liberated women from wearing multiple heavy petticoats, they created their own challenges. Women had difficulty sitting, passing through doorways, or standing close to fireplaces. There were tragic incidents of crinolines catching fire, leading to severe injuries and deaths. Fashion magazines of the era were filled with intricate illustrations of the latest styles. Women's fashion changed with remarkable speed. Sleeve styles, necklines, and skirt shapes shifted season by season. Keeping up with fashion was expensive and time-consuming, occupying much of the leisure time of upper-class women. Men's fashion, in contrast, became increasingly standardized and somber during Victoria's reign. The three-piece suit emerged as the standard uniform for gentlemen, typically in dark colors. The era's famous facial hair, mutton chops, full beards, and elaborate mustaches provided one of the few remaining avenues for masculine self-expression in dress. The railways transformed Britain. The Victorian era witnessed the complete transformation of Britain through the railway system. At the start of Victoria's reign, there were just a few hundred miles of track. By 1900, Britain had over 18,000 miles of railway, connecting even small towns to the national network. Railway travel collapsed distances and revolutionized daily life. Journeys that once took days could now be completed in hours. Fresh fish could be transported from coastal towns to inland cities. People could live in the suburbs and commute to work in city centers. The seaside holiday became possible for the middle classes. The railways created a whole new language and social customs. Railway time standardized time across the country. Previously, each town kept its own local time. Railway stations became architectural showcases, with grand arched roofs and elaborate ironwork. St Pancras Station in London, opened in 1868, featured a magnificent Gothic revival facade. The railways even influenced reading habits. W. H. Smith opened station bookstores selling cheap novels, railway literature, to entertain travelers. The railway carriage became a new social space, with strict etiquette about which class compartment one could occupy and how to behave during the journey. Victorian mourning rituals. Death was a constant presence in Victorian life, and elaborate mourning rituals reflected this reality. Child mortality was high, and diseases like tuberculosis, cholera, and typhoid claimed lives regularly. The Victorians developed intricate customs to process grief within their society. Mourning dress followed strict rules, particularly for women. A widow was expected to wear full mourning, entirely black, with no jewelry except jet, for 2 years. This was followed by periods of half mourning, gradually introducing grey, lavender, and white. A widower's mourning period was much shorter, typically just 3 months. Mourning jewelry became highly popular. Rings, brooches, and lockets were crafted to remember the deceased, often incorporating the person's hair woven into intricate patterns. Post-mortem photography also emerged. Families would pose with deceased loved ones for a final portrait, sometimes arranged to look as though they were sleeping. Queen Victoria's own extended mourning for Prince Albert, she wore black for 40 years, influenced these customs significantly. Her grief was profound and public, setting the tone for mourning practices throughout her empire. The Victorian servants' hierarchy. In wealthy Victorian households, an elaborate hierarchy of servants maintained the smooth running of daily life. A grand house might employ 30 or more servants, each with specific duties and a precise place in the household ranking. At the top were the butler and the housekeeper, who managed the male and female staff respectively. Below them were ladies' maids, valets, footmen, cooks, parlour maids, housemaids, scullery maids, and various specialists like coachmen and gardeners. Servants typically worked 14 to 16-hour days, with only 1 day off per month. They lived in the attic or basement, far from the family's quarters. Despite the hard work and long hours, service was considered respectable employment, offering more security than factory work. The relationship between servants and employers was complex. Some households treated servants almost as family members, while others maintained rigid formality. Servants had their own social hierarchy and would rarely socialize with those of different ranks. A lady's maid would never dine with the scullery maid, for instance. By the 1890s, domestic service was declining as other opportunities opened for working women. The typewriter and telephone created office jobs, while retail expansion meant shop work. The traditional servant-keeping household was beginning its long decline. Fact 9. Victorian Christmas traditions, 9 to 10 o'clock. Many of our modern Christmas traditions were established or popularized during the Victorian era. Before this period, Christmas was a relatively minor holiday in Britain. The Victorians transformed it into the family-centered, gift-giving celebration we know today. Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's German husband, is often credited with bringing the Christmas tree tradition to Britain, though this is somewhat simplified. The royal family's Christmas tree, illustrated in the Illustrated London News in 1848, certainly popularized the custom among the middle classes, who eagerly emulated royal fashions. Christmas cards were invented in 1843 by Sir Henry Cole, who commissioned the first commercial card. Early cards often featured surprisingly non-festive imagery, robins, flowers, and even somewhat macabre scenes. The sending of Christmas cards became a widespread custom by the 1870s, with the postal service handling millions each December. Christmas crackers were invented by London confectioner Tom Smith in the 1840s. Carol singing experienced a revival, with many traditional carols collected and published. Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol, published in 1843, helped shape Victorian Christmas sentiments of charity, family togetherness, and redemption. The Victorian Christmas dinner was elaborate, often featuring roast goose or turkey, plum pudding, and mince pies. The ritual of stirring the Christmas pudding, with each family member making a wish, became traditional. Boxing Day, the day after Christmas, was when the wealthy distributed gifts to servants and tradespeople. The Victorian obsession with ferns. The Victorians developed an extraordinary fascination with ferns, a phenomenon known as pteridamania or fern fever. This botanical craze swept Britain from the 1840s through the 1890s, captivating people from all social classes. Fern collecting became a popular outdoor activity. Families would take excursions to the countryside to find specimens, armed with specialized tools and collecting boxes. Rare varieties were highly prized, and some species were nearly driven to extinction by over-collecting. The Wardian case, invented by Dr. Nathaniel Ward in 1829, made it possible to grow ferns indoors in the smoky, dry atmosphere of Victorian homes. These sealed glass cases created miniature humid environments, perfect for delicate fern species. Elaborate Wardian cases became fashionable parlor decorations. Ferns appeared everywhere in Victorian design, pressed into albums, featured in needlework patterns, painted on china, carved into furniture, and incorporated into wallpaper and textile designs. Books about ferns were bestsellers. The obsession reflected the Victorian love of nature, classification, and collection. This mania was partly enabled by increased leisure time for the middle classes and improved rail transport that made countryside excursions possible. It also reflected the Victorian impulse to catalogue and understand the natural world, a time when amateur naturalists made significant scientific contributions. Victorian medicine and anesthesia. Victorian medicine made remarkable advances, though it remained limited by the standards of today. One of the most significant breakthroughs was the introduction of anesthesia for surgery and childbirth. In 1846, ether was first used for surgical anesthesia, and chloroform followed soon after. Queen Victoria herself used chloroform during the birth of her eighth child, Prince Leopold, in 1853. Her endorsement helped overcome religious objections that pain in childbirth was divinely ordained. However, medical understanding remained incomplete. The germ theory of disease wasn't fully accepted until the 1870s and 1880s, following the work of Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch. Before this, many doctors believed diseases were caused by miasmas, bad air from rotting organic matter. Surgery in the early Victorian era was a desperate measure, performed without proper hygiene. Surgeons operated in their regular clothes, wiped their instruments on their aprons, and reused sutures. The introduction of antiseptic techniques by Joseph Lister in the 1860s revolutionized surgery, dramatically reducing post-operative infections. Patent medicines were everywhere, often containing opium, cocaine, or alcohol. These were sold directly to the public with extravagant claims. Laudanum, a tincture of opium, was widely used for everything from pain relief to calming fussy babies. Addiction was common but rarely recognized as such. The Victorian workhouse. For the Victorian poor, the workhouse represented the last refuge from destitution. The Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834 established a system of workhouses across Britain where the impoverished could receive food and shelter in exchange for hard labour. Conditions were deliberately harsh. The principle of less eligibility meant that life in the workhouse should be less comfortable than the life of the poorest independent laborer, to discourage people from seeking relief. Families were separated. Men, women, and children lived in different sections and rarely saw each other. Inmates wore uniforms and followed strict schedules. Work was monotonous and exhausting, breaking stones, picking oakum, unraveling old rope, or grinding bones. Food was minimal and repetitive, typically bread, gruel, and occasionally cheese or bacon. The workhouse carried immense social stigma. Entering one meant admitting complete failure in Victorian society's eyes. Charles Dickens's Oliver Twist famously depicted workhouse conditions, shocking many middle-class readers who were unaware of such poverty. Despite their harshness, workhouses did provide a safety net, however inadequate. They offered medical care, including dedicated infirmaries, and some education for children. Nevertheless, they remained feared and hated institutions, symbols of Victorian society's treatment of its poorest members. Victorian photography emerges. Photography was invented just before Victoria's reign and developed rapidly during her era. The daguerreotype process, introduced in 1839, created images on silvered copper plates. These early photographs required long exposure times. Subjects had to remain absolutely still for several minutes. Portrait studios quickly became popular in cities and towns. Middle-class families could now afford to have their likenesses captured, something previously available only to the wealthy through painted portraits. The carte de visite, a small photographic portrait mounted on card, became wildly popular in the 1860s. People collected them like trading cards, swapping images of famous people and loved ones. Early photographic portraits have a characteristic solemn appearance. The long exposure times made smiling impractical. It was too difficult to hold a smile motionless for minutes. This gave Victorian photographs their serious, formal quality. By the 1880s, George Eastman's innovations made photography more accessible. Roll film replaced glass plates, and cameras became portable. The Kodak camera, introduced in 1888 with the slogan "You press the button, we do the rest," put photography into the hands of amateurs. Photography transformed how Victorians saw themselves and their world. It documented social conditions, captured historical events, enabled scientific study, and preserved family memories in ways previously impossible. The Victorian Music Hall. Music halls were the Victorian era's most popular form of entertainment for the working and middle classes. These venues combined variety performance with eating and drinking in a lively, informal atmosphere very different from the refined world of theatre. A typical music hall evening might feature singers, comedians, acrobats, dancers, magicians, and novelty acts. Performers like Marie Lloyd and Dan Leno became household names. Songs from the music hall, often sentimental ballads or cheeky comic numbers, were hummed on streets and in factories. The audience was as much a part of the experience as the performers. People ate, drank, talked, and joined in choruses. The chairman of the evening would introduce acts and maintain order, though rowdiness was expected and often enjoyed. Music halls were democratic spaces where different social classes mingled. Reformers and moralists often criticized music halls as vulgar and corrupting, particularly concerning young women. The entertainment could indeed be bawdy, with double entendres and suggestive songs. However, music halls were also important social spaces, offering escapism and community. By the 1890s, music halls were becoming more respectable and elaborate, evolving into the variety theatres that would dominate Edwardian entertainment. They represented a distinctly working-class culture that thrived during the Victorian era. Victorian scientific discoveries. The Victorian era was a golden age of scientific discovery and innovation. Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, fundamentally changing how we understand life on Earth. His theory of evolution through natural selection challenged traditional religious views and sparked intense debate. Michael Faraday's experiments with electricity and magnetism laid the groundwork for the electrical age. James Clerk Maxwell developed equations describing electromagnetism, unifying electricity, magnetism, and light. These theoretical advances would enable the electrical technologies that followed. In medicine, understanding of disease transformed. John Snow's investigation of the 1854 cholera outbreak in London, tracing it to a contaminated water pump, pioneered epidemiology. Florence Nightingale revolutionized nursing and hospital sanitation, using statistical analysis to demonstrate how cleanliness saved lives. Victorian scientists were often polymaths, interested in multiple fields. They were also frequently amateurs, people of independent means pursuing knowledge for its own sake. Scientific societies flourished, and public lectures on scientific topics drew large audiences. The Victorian belief in progress was deeply connected to scientific advancement. Science seemed to promise solutions to human problems, from disease to poverty. This optimism would be tested in the 20th century, but it defined the Victorian spirit of inquiry and improvement. The Victorian seaside holiday. The Victorian era saw the birth of the seaside holiday as a mass phenomenon. Previously, coastal resorts were exclusively for the wealthy. The expansion of railways made seaside towns accessible to the middle and even working classes. Resorts like Brighton, Blackpool, and Scarborough transformed themselves to accommodate visitors. Piers were constructed, offering entertainment and promenading opportunities. Blackpool's North Pier, opened in 1863, stretched 1,500 feet into the sea and featured a pavilion for concerts. The Victorians believed sea air and bathing were healthful. Taking the waters, whether seawater or mineral springs, was prescribed for various ailments. Beach bathing required elaborate equipment. Bathing machines, wheeled changing rooms, were drawn into the water to preserve modesty. Women wore voluminous bathing costumes covering them from neck to knee. Seaside entertainment evolved to meet demand. Punch and Judy shows, donkey rides, rock candy shops, and photography studios became staples. Piers offered orchestras, theatres, and variety performances. Walking along the promenade in one's finest clothes was a key activity. For working-class families, even a single day at the seaside was a cherished treat. Factory workers might save all year for the annual works outing to the coast. These holidays represented freedom, pleasure, and escape from industrial grime. Victorian food and dining etiquette. Victorian dining, particularly among the upper and middle classes, was governed by elaborate rules of etiquette. The formal dinner party was a crucial social ritual, with multiple courses served in strict order. A grand Victorian dinner might include soup, fish, entree, roast, game, vegetables, pudding, dessert, and savouries, accompanied by different wines for each course. Place settings could include numerous forks, knives, and spoons, each designated for specific dishes. Knowing which utensil to use demonstrated breeding and education. Dinner parties reinforced social hierarchies. Guests were seated according to rank and precedence. The host escorted the highest-ranking female guest to the dining room, with others following in order. Conversation was carefully managed. One spoke to the person on one's right during certain courses and to the left during others. Middle-class families aspired to upper-class standards. Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, published in 1861, became the Bible of domestic life, providing detailed recipes and guidance on running a proper household. Food itself varied dramatically by class. The poor subsisted largely on bread, tea, and whatever cheap protein they could afford. The middle classes enjoyed substantial meals but nothing approaching aristocratic extravagance. Meat was a status symbol. The more meat on the table, the more prosperous the household. The Victorian Empire, 18 to 7 p.m. During Victoria's reign, the British Empire expanded to become the largest empire in history, covering nearly a quarter of the world's land surface. The phrase "the empire on which the sun never sets" described British territories spanning every time zone. India was the jewel in the imperial crown. After the Indian Rebellion of 1857, the British government took direct control from the East India Company. In 1876, Parliament proclaimed Victoria Empress of India, a title she cherished deeply. The Victorian Empire was driven by economic interests, strategic considerations, and a belief in British cultural superiority. The Victorians genuinely believed they were bringing civilization, Christianity, and progress to backward peoples, a worldview we now recognize as racist and exploitative. Imperial expansion brought exotic goods to Britain: tea from India and Ceylon, rubber from Malaya, sugar from the Caribbean, diamonds from South Africa. It also brought contact with different cultures, inspiring Victorian art, literature, and design. However, this contact was deeply unequal, often involving violence, exploitation, and the suppression of indigenous cultures. The empire's legacy remains controversial. While it created global trade networks and spread certain technologies and institutions, it also extracted wealth from colonized peoples, disrupted traditional societies, and established patterns of inequality that persist today. Victorian children and education. Childhood in Victorian Britain varied drastically by social class. Upper-class children lived in nurseries, cared for by nannies, and saw their parents only briefly each day. They received education from governesses and tutors before boys were sent to boarding schools. Middle-class children experienced more parental involvement but still followed strict routines. Education was increasingly valued, especially for boys who needed preparation for professional careers. Girls' education focused on accomplishments, music, drawing, languages, that would make them attractive marriage prospects. For working-class children, childhood was often short. Many began work as young as 5 or 6 in factories, mines, or as servants. Conditions were frequently dangerous and exploitative. Reformers like Lord Shaftesbury campaigned for protective legislation. The Education Act of 1870 established a system of elementary schools across Britain, making basic education more widely available. By 1880, education was compulsory for children aged 5 to 10. These reforms represented growing recognition that childhood should be a protected period of development. Victorian attitudes toward children were complex. There was increasing sentimentalization of childhood innocence, visible in literature and art. Yet many children still faced harsh discipline, neglect, or exploitation. The gap between romantic ideals and lived reality was significant. The Age of Invention, a story of the Victorian world. When Queen Victoria ascended the British throne in 1837, nobody could have imagined that her reign would become one of the most explosive periods of innovation the world had ever seen. What began as a quiet island nation rooted in traditions soon transformed into the beating industrial heart of the planet. Steam, steel, electricity, sanitation, and communication, every corner of life was reshaped. This is the story of the Victorian age, told through the inventions that changed everything. The steam-powered beginning, 1830s-1840s. When Victoria took the throne, Britain was already humming with early industrial activity, but it was inventor George Stephenson's locomotive, perfected in the late 1820s and early 1830s, that truly set the tone. By the 1840s, vast railway networks spread across the nation, allowing ordinary people to travel faster than any human in history had ever moved across land. Steam powered more than trains, steamships soon crisscrossed oceans, turning months-long voyages into weeks. For the first time, the world felt reachable. And deep underground, steam-powered mining pumps, improved versions of James Watt's earlier engines, drained water from mines and fueled the extraction of coal and iron. Without these, the Victorian age wouldn't have existed. The telegraph, the first internet, 1837-1850s. Almost simultaneously with Victoria's coronation, two inventors, William Fothergill Cooke and Charles Wheatstone, introduced the electric telegraph in 1837. For millennia, the fastest possible communication was by horse. Now, messages could cross miles in seconds. By 1858, the first attempt at laying a transatlantic telegraph cable between Britain and America had begun. The early cables often failed, but by 1866 a permanent, reliable connection linked continents. Diplomacy, finance, journalism, everything changed. The world had taken its first step into digital communication. Photography, capturing time itself, 1839 onwards. In 1839, just 2 years after Victoria's reign began, Louis Daguerre's daguerreotype process reached Britain. Victorians were astonished. For the first time in human history, a moment could be frozen forever. Soon came William Henry Fox Talbot, a British pioneer who invented the coloritype process, the early ancestor of modern film photography. Portrait studios spread across London, and families who had never owned a painting suddenly had images of themselves. Photography democratized memory. Sanitation and soothe systems, saving millions, 1840s-1870s. The Victorian age wasn't only steam and glamour, it was also disease. London was choking under its own waste. Outbreaks of cholera, believed at the time to be caused by miasma, killed tens of thousands. Then came Dr. John Snow, who in 1854 traced a deadly cholera outbreak in Soho to a contaminated water pump on Broad Street. His discovery revolutionized public health, but the hero who physically transformed the city was Sir Joseph Bazalgette, the engineer behind London's modern sewer system, constructed from the late 1850s through the 1870s. His massive underground network carried waste away from drinking water sources, ending recurring epidemics and saving countless lives. It was one of the most important, though least glamorous, Victorian inventions. The rise of mass steel, the Bessemer process, 1856. In 1856, Henry Bessemer unveiled the Bessemer converter, an enormous iron furnace capable of turning molten iron into strong, durable steel quickly and cheaply. This single invention made skyscrapers, long-span bridges, and vast rail networks possible. Steel became the skeleton of the modern world. Victorians saw their cities grow upward and outward in ways previously unimaginable. Sewing machines and the birth of fast fashion, 1850s-1860s. While early sewing machines existed, it was Isaac Singer who perfected and commercialized them in the 1850s. With sewing machines in homes and factories, clothing production accelerated dramatically. For the first time, the working class could afford mass-produced garments. Fashion was no longer reserved for the wealthy elite. The Victorian middle class blossomed, well-dressed and industrious. The discovery of anesthesia, 1846 to 1847. No Victorian invention changed human suffering more than anesthesia. In 1846 ether was used successfully as an anesthetic, and in 1847 James Young Simpson, a Scottish physician, introduced chloroform. Suddenly, surgery no longer meant agonizing pain. Queen Victoria herself used chloroform during childbirth in 1853, helping popularize it. Medical science finally had the means to operate humanely. The telephone and the dawn of voice communication, 1870s. While the telegraph transmitted text, inventors wanted more. Among them was Alexander Graham Bell, who in 1876 successfully transmitted the human voice electrically. The telephone spread rapidly, with switchboards appearing in major cities. Victorians marveled at being able to hear someone's voice miles away, an experience once impossible to imagine. The incandescent light bulb, 1870s, 1880s. Several inventors experimented with electric lighting, but it was Joseph Swan in Britain and Thomas Edison in America who, working independently, created practical incandescent bulbs in the late 1870s. Gaslit streets soon gave way to electric glow. Shops stayed open longer, factories ran into the night, and homes became safer and brighter. The darkness that had defined human experience for millennia began to lift. The typewriter and the rise of modern offices, 1860s, 1870s. Although early designs existed, the first commercially successful typewriter, the Scholes and Glidden model, arrived in the 1870s. Offices changed almost overnight. Clerks typed faster than they could write by hand, and businesses expanded their administrative power. This also created new job opportunities for Victorian women, many of whom became typists, one of the first respectable white-collar roles open to them. The bicycle and new personal freedom, 1860s, 1890s. The Victorian era saw the evolution from the dangerous wooden bone shaker bicycle to the safety bicycle of the 1880s, featuring pedals, a chain, and equal-sized wheels. It revolutionized transportation, especially for women, offering unprecedented independence. Susan B. Anthony later said the bicycle did more to emancipate women than anything else in the world. The first electric appliances, late 1800s. By the end of Victoria's reign, electricity had moved from a curiosity to a practical home power source. Among the new electric devices were electric irons, electric kettles, early vacuum cleaners, electric trams. Cities buzzed with wires, motors, and electric lights, a world unimaginable in 1837. Motion pictures, the first flickers of film, 1890s. As the Victorian age drew to a close, inventors like William Friese-Greene, Edward Newbridge, and the Lumiere brothers experimented with moving images to by the 1890s. The first film cameras and projectors were capturing life, and soon, storytelling itself, on celluloid. When Victorians watched the earliest motion pictures, they gasped as if witnessing magic. Cinema had been born. The animals of the Victorian age, pets, farms, and the people who loved, and used, to. When most people imagine the Victorian age, they picture steam engines, strict etiquette, and swirling fog over cobbled streets. But hidden behind the factories and the gas lamps were the creatures that lived alongside humans. Pets curled by fireplaces, horses pulling entire cities forward, and farm animals that provided the backbone of daily survival. This is the story of Victorian animals, and how their owners treated them. Point 1. London's four-legged companions. The rise of pet keeping, visual, middle-class Victorian parlour, a dog resting by a lace-draped chair. Victorians adored pets, especially dogs. But this love took shape during the 19th century, when keeping animals for companionship became a sign of moral refinement and social status. Before the Victorian era, pets were mostly working animals. But by the 1840s and 1850s, the growing middle class embraced the idea of animals as companions. Dogs, the Victorian favorite breeds like terriers, spaniels, Newfoundlands, pugs, greyhounds, collies, became household icons. Queen Victoria herself owned more than 80 pets throughout her life, especially Pomeranians, helping popularize the breed across Europe. Victorian attitude toward dogs. Dogs were viewed as symbols of loyalty and moral virtue. Middle-class families believed that treating pets kindly encouraged children to develop compassion and discipline. Illustrations from the period often show dogs sitting loyally beside their young owners, sometimes even dressed in miniature clothing. But life was not kind to all. Many dogs roamed the streets as strays, scavenging in alleys. Before organized shelters existed, street dogs were often ignored, mistreated, or rounded up and killed. Cats, from mouses to beloved pets. Victorians admired cats for one main reason: they killed rats, and British cities were crawling with them. But by the late 1800s, the idea of the pet cat had arrived, thanks to writers like Harrison Weir, who organized the first cat show in 1871 at the Crystal Palace. Cats began to earn affection. They lounged by hearths. Middle-class women pampered them. They appeared in family portraits. Still, many Victorians remained suspicious of cats, associating them with superstition or rural witchcraft. Their treatment varied widely: a cherished pet in one household, a disposable mouser in another. Birds. The delicate Victorian obsession. Victorians adored keeping birds, especially canaries, finches, and budgerigars, introduced to Britain in the 1840s. Bird cages hung in thousands of windows. Why the obsession? Because Victorians believed that birds brought moral beauty and gentleness into the home. A singing bird was thought to elevate the soul. However, the craze led to cruelty as well. Wild birds were trapped in massive numbers. Some died during transport or kept in cramped cages. Demand for exotic birds surged, harming populations abroad. 2. Working animals. The engine behind the empire. Visual. A bustling Victorian street filled with horses, carts, and carriages. Without animals, the Victorian world would have stopped overnight. Horses. The backbone of the Victorian city. Horses powered everything: omnibuses, early buses, delivery carts, fire brigades, personal carriages, postal services, agriculture. London alone had more than 300,000 working horses by the late 1800s. How they were treated. Treatment varied by class. Loved horses. Upper-class owners pampered their horses. Fine grooming. Custom saddles. Private stables. Veterinary care. Exploited horses. Working horses suffered terribly. They pulled overloaded vehicles. They worked 12 to 14 hours a day. They faced exhaustion and lameness. Many collapsed in the streets and were left where they fell. The famous novel Black Beauty, 1877, by Anna Sewell exposed this cruelty. It was written to encourage compassion for horses, and it profoundly changed public attitudes. The book led to better working conditions, abolition of painful bearing reins, greater empathy for working animals. Donkeys. The poor man's horse. Donkeys were common in rural areas and poorer towns. They hauled produce, firewood, tools. Some were treated kindly, others were beaten or overworked. Donkeys often symbolized poverty, but also resilience. They worked where horses could not. 3. Farm animals. Life in the Victorian countryside. Visual. Misty English farm. Cows grazing, chickens scratching. Victorian farms were worlds of their own. The Industrial Revolution had modernized cities, but the countryside moved at the pace of hooves and harvests. Cows, dairy queens and farm essentials. Victorian cows were used for milk, butter, cheese, field work in some regions. But treatment depended on the farm. Small family farms, cows had names. Families knew each animal personally. They grazed outdoors and lived natural lives. Large commercial dairies, conditions were harsher. Cows were milked under strict schedules. Disease spread easily due to overcrowding. Swill dairies in cities fed cows brewery waste, leading to illness. Milk wasn't refrigerated, causing widespread contamination and disease in children. Ironically, cows suffered and so did the public pigs. The Victorian garbage disposers. Pigs were extremely common, fed household scraps. Raised behind cottages. Sent to slaughter for families or local markets. They were rarely treated as pets but were valuable. Many rural families depended on a single pig as their main meat supply for the entire winter. Sheep, wool, meat, and the hills. Sheep grazed across Britain's hills and fields. Farmers treated them as economic assets rather than companions, but many cared deeply for their flocks. Challenges included harsh winters, disease, predators, long, difficult shearing days. Wool was a major industry, and Victorian Britain's mills relied heavily on sheep farms. Chickens, everyday providers. Chickens were everywhere. Cities, farms, alleys, backyards. They supplied eggs, meat, feathers. Victorian chickens lived more naturally than modern ones. Free-ranging, eating insects, roosting in small coops. But they also faced harsh winters, predators, occasional neglect. Their value was practical rather than sentimental. Entertainment and controversy. Animals in shows and exhibitions. Victorian menageries before modern zoos. Victorians visited traveling menageries, collections of exotic animals like lions, tigers, elephants, monkeys, bears. These animals lived in cramped cages and suffered poor conditions. The public saw them as wonders of the expanding British Empire. The rise of animal welfare. Victorians pioneered animal rights movements. The RSPCA, Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, was founded in 1824, decades before most nations had such organizations. Public awareness grew due to literature, social reformers, and new laws. By the late Victorian era, dog baiting and bull baiting were outlawed. Cockfighting became illegal. Laws protected working horses. Sentiment for animal kindness spread through society. Victorians did not always treat animals well, but they were among the first in history to try to protect them. How animals shaped the Victorian soul. Victorians believed that caring for animals improved the human spirit. Pamphlets, school books, and sermons emphasized kindness, responsibility, compassion. The way a person treated a horse or pet was seen as a reflection of their moral character. Animals pulled their wagons, warmed their homes, filled their larders, guarded their families, and entertained their children. Whether cherished or exploited, pets and farm animals stood at the center of Victorian daily life. When Queen Victoria died in 1901, she left behind not only an empire transformed by machines, but a society forever changed in how it viewed the creatures around them. Victorian clothing. A story of threads, class, and characters. Imagine London in the late 1800s. Fog settles over cobblestones. Carriages rattle down narrow streets. Lanterns flicker gold against the soot-black sky. And in the middle of this bustling world, 1,000 lives pass by, each stitched into society by the clothes they wear. Because in Victorian England, clothing didn't just cover you, it announced you. Let's walk through a single fictional day, meeting people across the social ladder, and observe what they wear and what it reveals. The servants' quarters, cloth of necessity dawn deep beneath the grand townhouse of the Farnsworth family. The servants' day begins long before the sun arrives. The scullery maid, Annie's clothing is simple, cheap, and purely practical. A coarse cotton or wool dress, usually brown, navy, or faded gray. A large white apron, easily washable. No crinoline, no bustle, those would only get in the way. Sturdy leather boots. Hair scraped into a tight bun, often covered with a small cap or kerchief. Her clothes mark her as the lowest in the hierarchy, plain, utilitarian, and frequently mended. As she scrubs pots beside the pump, steam rising from the copper basin, she thinks about how her dress has been patched so many times the original color can hardly be seen. But she's used to it. Servants weren't meant to stand out. The housemaid, Sarah dresses a little better, a dark wool dress, to hide soot and dust. A crisp pinafore apron. A small frilled cap. Black boots with laces. She carries a feather duster and moves silently up the stairs. Her clothing is meant to be neat but invisible. She must blend into hallways, not disturb guests, not rustle. The butler, Mr. Hayes, the highest-ranking male servant, looks almost like a gentleman. Black tailcoat. Starched white shirt. White bow tie. Waistcoat, always impeccable. Polished shoes. White gloves for formal service. If not for his deferential posture and quiet voice, he could be mistaken for a wealthy man. His clothing is about discipline, precision, and status within the servant hierarchy. The working class, clothes for survival. Morning streets of London. In the noisy markets and smoky factories, clothes serve different needs. The factory worker, wool trousers. Rough cotton shirt. Flat cap or bowler hat. Sturdy boots. Sometimes a canvas apron or leather protecting piece. Clothing darkened quickly from soot and sweat. Garments were worn until they fell apart. The working class woman, a simple wool dress. Shawl for warmth. Apron, often stained. Bonnet if she could afford one. Children's clothing, often hand-me-downs, made of strong cotton or wool. Children ran in pinafores. Short trousers for boys. Wool socks and button boots. Nothing was fashionable, only functional. The middle class. Polished respectability. Midday. Shopping district. Here, clothing becomes more refined. The middle-class woman, she steps out of a carriage wearing a bodice and skirt ensemble, often matching. Corset tightly laced beneath. Bustle in later Victorian years, after 1870s. Decorated hat with ribbons, feathers, perhaps even stuffed birds. Kid leather gloves. High-buttoned boots. Colors were richer, burgundy, plum, deep blue. Her style balanced fashion and propriety. Too plain was unfashionable, too extravagant appeared arrogant. The middle-class man, typically a merchant, banker, or clerk, three-piece suit, matching coat, waistcoat, trousers. Frock coat for day wear. Top hat or bowler. Pocket watch. Starched collar and tie. Middle-class clothing aimed to show discipline, success, and moral respectability, values Victorians cherished. Middle-class children, girls. Dresses with pinafores. Sashes. Small bonnets. Kid boots. Boys. Knee-length trousers. Jackets. Collared shirts. Caps. At around age 7, boys graduated to longer trousers, a symbolic moment. The aristocracy, fashion as power evening, T. Farnworth's grand dinner. Now we enter the height of Victorian display. Lady Eleanor Farnsworth, her gown is an artwork, silk or satin in jewel tones. Corset shaping the iconic hourglass silhouette. Crinoline, 1850s-1860s, creating a vast bell-shaped skirt, sometimes over 5 feet wide. Later fashions include bustles, making the back dramatically structured. Fine lace, often handmade. Gloves, required by etiquette. Jewels, pearls, diamonds, brooches. How arranged in coils, braids, or curls. She glides through the hall as candles strike her silk, turning it luminous. The dress isn't just clothing, it's a declaration: I belong to the highest tier of society. Lord Henry Farnsworth. Victorian aristocratic men show wealth in quieter ways. Black evening tailcoat. White waistcoat. White bow tie, strict dress code. Polished leather shoes. Gold pocket watch. Cufflinks. Even the cut of his suit is bespoke and unmistakably expensive. The Farnsworth children, aristocratic children dressed like miniature adults. Girls, high-quality cotton or silk dresses. Decorative sashes. Pinafores for daytime. Bonnet and gloves. Boys, silk or fine wool suits. Velvet jackets. Lace collars. Sometimes little Lord Fauntleroy-style outfits in later decades. They look immaculate, cared for by nannies rather than parents. Clothing as social law. Every thread in Victorian England told a story. Servants wore durability. Workers wore necessity. The middle class wore respectability. Aristocrats wore opulence. Children wore miniature versions of their world's expectations. To walk through Victorian society was like reading a novel written in fabric, and every button, ribbon, corset bone, or apron string whispered the same truth. In Victorian England, your clothes didn't just show who you were, they showed who you were allowed to be. Victorian crime, a story of shadows, justice, and the underworld. Fog clings to the gas lamps of London. Horse hooves echo through narrow alleys slick with coal dust. Somewhere in the distance, a whistle shrieks, the sound of a constable on the chase. Welcome to Victorian Britain, an age of invention and empire, but also a world crawling with danger. Crime existed in every shadow, from petty pickpockets to brutal murderers. The clothing of the era may be refined, but the streets? Not at all. Let's step through one day and one night in Victorian London, meeting criminals, police, and famous cases along the way, all historically real. The Streets Wake UP, Common Crime Morning, 1870, Covent Garden Market. The vendors shout. Carriages clatter. Amidst the noise, young Tommy Briggs, age 11, slips between skirts and coat tails. He is a real type of Victorian criminal, a child pickpocket, common in cities. What he does: Tommy reaches for a coin purse tied to a woman's belt. Children like him were small, fast, and often worked in gangs. If caught, Victorian Britain was harsh. Children could be sent to adult prisons or to reformatory schools, transported earlier in the century to Australia, or whipped. At age 8, a child could be tried for theft. Many were. Tommy moves quickly, but a gloved hand grips his wrist. Got you, lad. A police constable stands over him, wearing the new dark blue uniform introduced in 1829 when Sir Robert Peel founded the Metropolitan Police, the first professional force in London. The police, How Victorians fought crime. Victorian policing was still evolving. No radios. No fingerprinting until 1892. Limited forensic science. Many crimes solved by foot patrols, interrogation, witness statements. Tools. Constables carried a wooden truncheon. Handcuffs, ratchet type. A whistle, later years. A lantern at night. Crime was everywhere: theft, prostitution, fraud, burglary, murder, forgery, smuggling, and political crime. But now let's scale up, from petty crime to the infamous. The crime alley. The underworld emerges. The Billy Boys of Whitechapel gangs thrived in slums. Members were involved in extortion, illegal gambling, fencing, stolen goods, violent turf disputes. Slum crime often went unpunished. Too many people, too little police presence, but one criminal would overshadow them all. The police. How Victorians fought crime. Victorian policing was still evolving. No radios. No fingerprinting until 1892. Limited forensic science. Many crimes solved by foot patrols, interrogation, witness statements. Tools. Constables carried a wooden truncheon. Handcuffs, ratchet type. A whistle, later years. A lantern at night. Crime was everywhere: theft, prostitution, fraud, burglary, murder, forgery, smuggling, and political crime. But now let's scale up, from petty crime to the infamous. The crime alley. The underworld emerges. The Billy Boys of Whitechapel gangs thrived in slums. Members were involved in extortion, illegal gambling, fencing, stolen goods, violent turf disputes. Slum crime often went unpunished. Too many people, too little police presence. But one criminal would overshadow them all. The most famous crime of the era. Jack the Ripper. Whitechapel, 1888. Midnight. A scream slices through the fog. A woman collapses under a gas lamp. This is the world of Jack the Ripper, perhaps the most infamous murderer of the 19th century. The victims, all of the canonical five: Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly, were murdered in Whitechapel. What made the crimes terrifying? Brutal mutilation. Apparently random victims. Letters to the police, some likely hoaxes. No forensic evidence. The police response detectives from both the Metropolitan Police and City of London Police worked the case. But without modern tools, they relied on door-to-door questioning, interviews, bloodhounds, attempted but failed, autopsies. No one was ever convicted. Jack the Ripper became the symbol of Victorian true crime, haunting history forever. Other famous Victorian crimes. 1. The roadside murder. The case of Charles Peace, 1870s. Charles Peace was a notorious burglar, thief, and murderer. Famous for expert break-ins, shooting a policeman, killing a neighbor. Penalty: he was caught and hanged in 1879 at Leeds. Executions were public until 1868, after which they occurred inside prisons, but crowds still waited outside. 2. The Bermondsey murder. Frederick and Marie Manning, 1849. A couple who murdered Marie's lover and buried him under the kitchen floor. Public reaction: tens of thousands attended their public execution, including Charles Dickens, who was horrified by the cheering crowd. 3. The murder of Hannah Dobbs, 1860s. Victorian domestic murder cases became sensational newspaper stories. Hannah Dobbs was accused of poisoning her employer. Newspapers turned trials into national dramas. Victorian crime reporting was the birth of true crime journalism. 4. The Tichborne claimant fraud, 1870s, one of the most famous fraud cases in Victorian Britain. The crime: a butcher from Wagga Wagga, Australia, claimed he was a lost English aristocrat, heir to a fortune. Outcome: he was exposed and jailed for perjury, but many working-class people believed him, seeing him as a folk hero. 5. Oscar Wilde's trial, 1895. Gross indecency: a legal case, not a violent crime, but one of the most famous Victorian trials. Wilde sued the Marquis of Queensberry for libel. The case backfired. Wilde was put on trial for homosexual behaviour, illegal under Victorian law. Penalty: he was sentenced to 2 years of hard labour, a punishment that broke his health. Punishments and the law: Victorian justice could be brutal. 1. Hanging: still the ultimate penalty. Crimes punishable by hanging included murder, high treason, certain forms of burglary or robbery, earlier years. Later mostly reserved for murder. Executions became private from 1868. 2. Transportation: before the 1850s, convicts were sent to Australia. 7-year terms. 14-year terms. Life. After Australia rejected further convicts, transportation ended. 3. Hard labour: criminals could be sentenced to the treadmill, walking endlessly to power mills, breaking stones, oakum picking, unravelling old ship rope, silent prisons, no talking allowed. 4. Imprisonment: prisons like Newgate, Millbank, and later Wormwood Scrubs held criminals of all kinds. Cells were cold, dark, and regimented. 5. Fines and public shaming: offences like drunkenness, prostitution, minor theft, often resulted in fines, which many couldn't pay, leading to jail time anyway. The Nightfall crime: a final story night, 1885. London docks: a sailor stumbles out of a pub, counting his week's wages. From the darkness, a figure rushes forward, a garroter. Garrotting robberies were so common in the 1850s-60s that Parliament passed laws imposing penal servitude for even attempted attacks. The sailor goes down. A constable hears the scuffle and blows his whistle. 2 more officers run in. The robber is caught, sentenced to 5 years of hard labour. Victorian law offered little mercy. The truth of Victorian crime: in the end, the Victorian era was a paradox: courteous manners versus savage punishments, scientific progress versus primitive policing, lavish wealth versus desperate poverty, respectable facades versus crimes hidden in foggy alleys. Every street corner, police cell, courtroom, and gallows told part of the story. Victorian Britain built the foundations of modern law, but it did so through blood, fear, reform, and some of the most unforgettable crimes in history. Victorian entertainment: a world of spectacle, shadows and showmen where the gas lamps shine brightest, the secrets are darkest. Fog curls around London's West End as crowds spill from omnibuses and carriages. Men in top hats, women in silk gowns, chimney sweeps, match girls, ragged boot blacks, all heading into a world of Victorian entertainment. The Victorian age didn't just invent industries. It invented popular culture. Tonight, we travel through theatres, music halls, circuses, freak shows, world fairs, magic shows, penny gaffs, salons, pleasure gardens, and the birth of cinema, meeting the real stars who made the Victorian era dazzling, dangerous, and unforgettable. The Theatre District Awakens scene, London, 1880. Drury Lane Theatre gas lamps hiss. The orchestra tunes. A velvet curtain trembles. Victorian theatre wasn't polite. It was rowdy, emotional, and spectacular. Famous Victorian actors and actresses. 1. Henry Irving, 1838 to 1905. The first actor ever knighted, Irving was a legend of Shakespearean tragedy. He dominated the Lyceum Theatre. Known for Hamlet, Macbeth, The Bells. Dramatic, brooding performances. Partnered with Ellen Terry. Crowds worshipped him so much that Bram Stoker, author of Dracula, worked as his personal manager for decades, and many believe Irving inspired the character of Dracula himself. 2. Ellen Terry, 1847 to 1928, Victorian Britain's most beloved actress. Master of Shakespearean heroines. Praised for her beauty, wit, and intelligence. Wore the iconic beetle wing dress in Macbeth, embroidered with thousands of real beetle wings. Had a fiercely independent personal life that scandalized society. Yet the public adored her. She became a symbol of the modern Victorian woman. 3. Sarah Bernhardt, 1844 to 1923, the diva of Europe, often performing in London. Slept in coffins for dramatic inspiration. Played male roles like Hamlet. Commanding voice, wild charisma. Newspapers called her the Divine Sarah. Music halls. The heart of working class entertainment. The theatre may have belonged to the wealthy, but music halls belonged to everyone. Scene, 1865. The Canterbury Music Hall. Ale foams, laughter rolls, chairs scrape, and cigarette smoke hangs thick. Here, entertainment is loud, cheeky, and infectious. What music halls included comic singers, risque dancers, sketch comedy, acrobatics, magicians, political satire, patter songs, fast comedic songs. Now meet the stars. 1. Marie Lloyd, 1870 to 1922, the Queen of Music Hall Comedy. Known for double entendre songs like She'd Never Had Her Ticket Punched Before. Witty, rebellious, charming. Loved by the working class but hated by moral reformers. Once, when told to be more proper, she winked at the crowd and said, "A girl must make a living somehow." 2. Dan Leno, 1860 to 1904, the most famous Victorian comedian. Performed hilarious monologues. Played dame roles in pantomimes. His annual Christmas performances drew gigantic crowds. Queen Victoria herself enjoyed his comedy. The world of magic, illusion and mystery. The Victorians adored supernatural spectacle. Enter the magicians. 1. John Neville Maskelyne, 1839 to 1917, the father of modern stage magic. Famous for the psycho-automaton, a mind-reading robot. Exposed fraudulent spiritualists. Created illusions still used today. Performed at the Egyptian Hall, known as England's home of mystery. 2. Harry Keller, the American illusionist who dominated the global Victorian stage. Known for the levitation illusion. Posters showed him with little devils whispering secrets. He inspired Houdini, who emerged right at the end of the Victorian era. The circus. Spectacle under the big top. The arrival of the circus. When red and yellow wagons rolled into town, crowds cheered. Victorian circuses featured horse acrobatics, tightrope walkers, lions and elephants, strongmen, clowns, bareback riders. Famous figures. 1. Pablo Fancu, 1810 to 1871, Britain's most famous circus owner, and notably, the first black circus proprietor in the UK. His circus was so iconic that the Beatles later referenced him in Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. 2. General Tom Thumb, Charles Stratton, a star of P.T. Barnum's shows. Toured Victorian Britain. Met Queen Victoria 3 times. Performed comedy, song, and impersonations. His fame was so immense that newspapers reported his wedding like a royal event. Victorian freak shows. A complex history. Victorian society had a dark fascination with human curiosities. Real performers included 1. Joseph Merrick, the Elephant Man, 1862 to 1890, one of the most famous figures of the era, exhibited due to severe deformities. Later befriended Dr. Frederick Treves. Lived at London Hospital. Known for his intelligence, kindness, and poetry. His story remains one of the most tragic and moving of the Victorian era. 2. Chang and Eng Bunker, the original Siamese twins conjoined twins from Siam, Thailand, touring Europe and America. They were admired, studied, and exploited in equal measure, a reflection of Victorian fascination with the unusual. Pleasure gardens and outdoor amusement scene. Vauxhall Gardens, 1850s lanterns glow. Fireworks burst. Couples stroll to orchestras playing Strauss waltzes. Pleasure gardens offered concerts, acrobatics, fireworks, balloon ascents, masquerade balls, mechanical wonders. They were the Victorian equivalent of theme parks. The Great Exhibitions. Entertainment on a global scale. London, 1851. The Crystal Palace Exhibition, 6 million visitors. Exotic animals. Steam engines. Jewels from India. Telegraphs. Early photography. Electricity experiments. All under the enormous glass palace designed by Joseph Paxton. This wasn't just entertainment, it was the birth of modern tourism. Literature, salons, and the birth of pop culture. Victorians didn't just watch entertainment. They read it, debated it, and created it. Famous Victorian writers who were celebrity entertainers. Charles Dickens performed dramatic readings of his novels. Audiences fainted during his Sikes and Nancy reading. Oscar Wilde, a superstar lecturer. Overflowing auditoriums. Razor-sharp wit. Fashion icon. His downfall became one of the era's biggest scandals. Punch and Judy shows. Childhood entertainment. The sound of slapsticks echoes across Brighton Beach. Punch, with his hooked nose, smacks the policeman for laughs. Children shriek with delight. This puppet comedy dates back centuries, but Victorians cemented it as a seaside tradition. Sports and public spectacle. Victorian Britain invented many modern sports. Football, codified 1863. Rugby, boxing, cricket clubs, horse racing, rowing competitions, bicycling clubs. Crowds filled early stadiums, cheering like modern fans. The birth of moving pictures. By the 1890s, flickering images astonished Victorian audiences. Early filmmakers like Louis Le Prince filmed Roundhay, 1888, the oldest surviving film. The Lumiere brothers. Robert W. Paul in London. These were the first steps towards cinemas. The Victorian era begins with candlelit theatres and ends with the first movie cameras. A final scene. The gaslights fade as midnight falls over Victorian London. The theatres empty. Magicians pack their props. Circus wagons rumble away. Music hall comedians count their coins. Children clutch seaside puppets. Scholars debate novels in smoky drawing rooms. The Victorian age was dramatic, inventive, curious, excessive, elegant, contradictory, and always entertaining. Their world shaped ours. Theatre, film, celebrity culture, sport, music, magic, and mass entertainment all owe a debt to the Victorians. Victorian transportation. A story of speed, steam, and revolution. The year is 1837. Queen Victoria steps onto the throne, and Britain stands at the edge of a transformation unlike anything in history. Roads, rails, ships, bicycles, and engines all roar to life in the decades that follow. This is the story of how the Victorians re-engineered the world, and the inventors who risked everything to make it happen. The Age of Steam, Trains and the Railway Kings scene, 1840. A whistle shrieks across the English countryside. Steam pours from a locomotive, iron wheels sparking on fresh-laid track. Villagers gather to watch as the impossible becomes real, humans moving faster than horses. This revolution was driven by three giants. 1. George Stephenson, 1781 to 1848. The father of railways. Although Stephenson's peak began just before Victoria's reign, his inventions defined the Victorian world. His greatest achievements: built the first successful steam locomotive, Locomotion No. 1. Created the rocket, winner of the Rainhill trials. Designed the standard gauge still used worldwide, 4 feet 8.5 inches. Engineered the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, the first intercity railway. His story: Stephenson rose from illiteracy and coal mining to become one of the most powerful engineers in Britain. His son, Robert Stephenson, continued his legacy by building iconic locomotives and bridges. 2. Isambard Kingdom Brunel, 1806 to 1859. The most visionary Victorian engineer. Brunel was daring, brilliant, and often terrifyingly bold. His railway legacy: built the Great Western Railway, the most beautiful railway in the world. Designed the broad gauge system for smoother travel. Constructed dramatic viaducts, tunnels, and stations. Created innovative locomotives with Daniel Gooch. Brunel believed people should travel from London to New York by steam, an idea he literally tried to build. We'll get to that in the ships section. 3. Daniel Gooch, 1816 to 1889. Chief locomotive engineer of the Great Western Railway. Designed successful broad-gauge engines like the North Star. Worked closely with Brunel. Developed dependable high-speed locomotives. While Brunel dreamed, Gooch made those dreams actually run on rails. The Iron Horse explodes across Britain. By the 1860s, coal, goods, and mail moved at speeds never seen before. Workers commuted from suburbs for the first time. Seaside holidays became possible. Time zones were standardized. Railways required synchronized time. The Victorians were the first people in history to travel faster than their ancestors ever imagined. The birth of the underground scene. London, 1863. Gas lamps flicker in a tunnel of steam. The world's first underground railway opens. The Metropolitan Railway. The inventors and engineers behind it. Charles Pearson, city solicitor and visionary behind the underground concept. John Fowler, chief engineer. Benjamin Baker, later helped expand the system. The cut-and-cover method was used. Dig up streets, lay tracks, rebuild the roadway. Victorians rode in smoke-filled carriages pulled by steam locomotives beneath the city, hot, smoggy, life-saving for commuters. It was revolutionary. Road transport, carriages, coaches, and early motor cars. Before engines took over, the Victorians dominated horse-drawn travel. Common transportation. Hansom cabs. Omnibuses. Stagecoaches. Delivery wagons. Private carriages, brooms, landaus, victories. Inventors mattered here too. 1. Joseph Hansom, 1803 to 1882. Inventor of the hansom cab. Light, fast, safe, and ideal for crowded streets. Became the taxi of Victorian cities. Could turn sharply and handle uneven roads. Its popularity spread across Europe and America. 2. Walter Hancock, 1799 to 1852. Early steam carriage pioneer. Although earlier than Victoria's reign, his experiments influenced Victorian road transport. Built steam-powered road vehicles. Operated a bus service in London in the 1830s. Ultimately beaten by railway expansion. The bicycle revolution. Victorians created the bicycle era, and many designs still influence bikes today. 1. The velocipede, bone shaker, 1860s. Invented in France by Pierre Micos but hugely popular in Victorian Britain. Heavy wooden frame. Iron tires. Pedals attached to the front wheel. Called the bone shaker for obvious reasons. 2. The penny farthing, high wheeler, 1870s. Invented by Eugene Meyer, perfected by James Starley in Britain. James Starley, 1830 to 1881. The father of the British bicycle industry. Innovated tension-spoked wheels. Built the famous aerial bicycle. His designs led to modern bicycles. Riders became symbols of speed and daring, but the bikes were dangerous. Falls from the high wheel often caused broken bones. 3. The safety bicycle, 1880s-1890s. Invented by John Kemp Starley, James Starley's nephew. The Rover safety bicycle. 2 equal-sized wheels. Chain drive. Much safer. Practical for women, changing fashion and freedom. This bicycle is essentially the modern bike we still use today. The great age of ships and steam power. Victorians conquered the seas with colossal engineering. 1. Isambard Kingdom Brunel steamships. Brunel appears again, because he built the 3 most important ships of the 19th century. A. SS Great Western, 1838. The first steamship specifically built for the Atlantic. B. SS Great Britain, 1845. The world's first iron-hulled, screw-propelled ocean liner. A radical design. Faster, stronger, more efficient. Set the model for all modern ships. C. SS Great Eastern, 1858. The largest ship in the world for 40 years. Could carry 4,000 passengers. So large it frightened crowds. Used later to lay the first successful transatlantic telegraph cable. Brunel died before seeing the Great Eastern's final success. 2. Samuel Cunard, 1787 to 1865. Founder of the Cunard Line. Introduced reliable transatlantic steamship service. Known for safety and punctuality. Became the leading passenger line of the era. His ships connected continents and shrunk the world. 3. William Denny and Brothers, Denny Shipbuilders. Innovators in ship design and testing tanks. Pioneered hydrodynamic testing. Built ferries, steamships, naval craft. Canals and inland waterways. Victorian engineering improved earlier Georgian projects. Famous canals and engineers. Thomas Telford, carried into early Victorian years. James Brindley, Influence continued. John Rennie, engineer of docks and canal improvements. Canals moved coal, pottery, food, and raw materials before railways overtook them. Early motor cars, late Victorian era. The Victorian age closed with the first true automobiles. 1. Carl Benz, 1844 to 1929, 1885 motor wagon. Not British, but important, the world's first practical petrol car. British inventors soon followed. 2. Frederick Lanchester, 1868 to 1946. Britain's first native automobile inventor. Built the first all-British petrol car, 1895 to 1896. Developed early braking and suspension systems. Founded the Lanchester Motor Company. 3. John Henry Knight, 1847 to 1917. Built one of the earliest British petrol automobiles, 1895. Was fined for driving it because early laws still restricted self-propelled vehicles. Aerial dreams, early flight. The Victorians reached for the sky too. Sir George Cayley, 1773 to 1857. The father of aerodynamics. Identified the forces of flight. Built the first man-carrying gliders. His work directly inspired the Wright brothers. Though pre-Victorian in birth, his breakthroughs influenced Victorian-era flight experiments. Percy Pilcher, 1866 to 1899. A Victorian glider pioneer. Designed the Hawk glider. Came close to building a powered flight machine. Died in a gliding accident before he achieved powered flight. His death may have delayed aviation by years. A final scene, the Great Transportation Shift. By the end of the Victorian era, travel times shrank from days to hours. Steamships connected continents. Trains connected cities. Bicycles redefined mobility and gender roles. Underground railways reinvented cities. Early cars hinted at the 20th century. Aviation dreams were taking shape. No other era transformed movement so dramatically. Victorians didn't just change transportation. They changed the speed of life itself. The Royal Victorians, a full, in-depth story of the monarchs and family who shaped the era, 1837 to 1901, Chapter 1, A Young Queen Awakens, Victoria Takes the Throne. It is dawn on the 20th of June 1837, and the corridors of Kensington Palace are unusually busy. A knock echoes on the bedroom door of an 18-year-old girl. "The Queen," says the Archbishop of Canterbury. Victoria rises from her bed, small, shy, but steady. Her uncle King William IV has died. She is now Queen Victoria, ruler of the United Kingdom and Ireland. She is the fifth monarch of the House of Hanover, but the first monarch born in Britain in over 70 years. Her reign will stretch 63 years, the second longest in British history, after Elizabeth II. Chapter 2, Queen Victoria, 1819 to 1901, Length of Reign, the 20th of June 1837 to the 22nd of January 1901, 63 years, 7 months, Role, Monarch of the United Kingdom, Empress of India, from 1876. Victoria was born to father, Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, son of King George III. Mother, Princess Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld. Raised under the strict Kensington system, She grew up isolated and tightly controlled, something she would rebel against as queen. She was emotional, stubborn, sharp-minded, and deeply devoted to the people she loved. And above all, she adored one man. Chapter 3. Prince Albert, 1819 to 1861, the love that built an empire. Enter Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, Victoria's cousin from Germany. When they first met, Victoria said he had the most beautiful eyes and was perfect. They married on the 10th of February 1840. Victoria proposed to him, because royalty could not be proposed to. Albert was not just a consort. He was an organizer of the Great Exhibition of 1851, a reformer of science, education, and industry, a supporter of early technologies like electricity, photography, and railways, a political advisor behind the scenes. When Albert died in 1861 at age 42, Victoria fell into a lifetime of mourning, wearing black for the rest of her life. His death reshaped the monarchy and the Queen herself. Chapter 4. The 9 Royal Children, the family that ruled Europe. Victoria and Albert had 9 children, who married into royal families across Europe, earning Victoria the nickname Grandmother of Europe. Here are their stories. 1. Victoria, Princess Royal, 1840 to 1901. Married German Emperor Frederick III. Mother of Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, one of Europe's most powerful and controversial rulers. 2. Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, King Edward VII, 1841 to 1910. Victoria's oldest son. Playful, fond of parties, often clashing with his strict mother. He became king after Victoria's death. Length of reign, 1901 to 1910. He modernized the monarchy and became known as the Uncle of Europe. 3. Princess Alice, 1843 to 1878. Married Louis IV of Hesse. Known for her compassion and nursing work. Mother of Empress Alexandra of Russia, wife of Tsar Nicholas II. Alice died tragically young from diphtheria. 4. Prince Alfred, 1844 to 1900. Served in the Royal Navy. Later became Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. 5. Princess Helena, 1846 to 1923. Known for charity work and supporting nursing reform. 6. Princess Louise, 1848 to 1939. A rebellious artist. Married John Campbell, Marquis of Lorne, the first time a monarch's child married a non-royal in centuries. 7. Prince Arthur, 1850 to 1942. A lifelong military man. Served as Governor-General of Canada. 8. Prince Leopold, 1853 to 1884. Suffered from hemophilia. Died from complications after a fall. His illness spread hemophilia into several European royal families through his sisters. 9. Princess Beatrice, 1857 to 1944. Victoria's closest companion. Served as her mother's secretary until the Queen's death. Chapter 5. The future kings of the Victorian bloodline. Though Queen Victoria was the only monarch of the era, 2 future kings were shaped during this period. King Edward VII, 1841 to 1910. Victoria's eldest son. Often overshadowed by his mother, who rarely trusted him with power. When he became king in 1901, He transformed the monarchy into a modern institution, more public, more diplomatic, and more socially influential. King George V, 1865 to 1936. Son of Edward VII and Victoria's grandson. Though he reigned after Victoria, he was born during the Victorian age and grew up under her powerful shadow. Chapter 6. Extended royal figures in Victoria's reign. 1. King William IV, Victoria's uncle, reigned 1830 to 1837. The King Victoria succeeded. He disliked Victoria's mother and sped up Victoria's independence by refusing to let her mother act as regent. 2. Princess Augusta, Victoria's aunt, and the Hanoverian relatives. Prominent in early Victorian court politics. 3. The Duke of Cumberland, King Ernest Augustus of Hanover. Victoria's uncle, who became King of Hanover after Salic law prevented her from ruling there. He objected to some of Victoria's early decisions, causing tension between Britain and Hanover. Chapter 7. The Royal Homes and Court Life. The Victorian royal family lived across a network of residences. Buckingham Palace became the royal administrative centre. Windsor Castle, formal functions. Osborne House, Isle of Wight, built by Albert as a family retreat. Balmoral Castle, Scotland, Victoria's favourite refuge. Victoria's devotion to Balmoral and Scottish culture influenced the rise of tartan fashion, Highland tourism, popular romanticisation of Scotland. Chapter 8. The Royal Legacy. By the end of her reign, Queen Victoria presided over the largest empire in history, a population explosion, massive technological progress, transformations in science, medicine, and communications. Her descendants included Kaiser Wilhelm II, Germany; Tsaritsa Alexandra, Russia; kings of Norway, Sweden, Spain, and the UK. The Victorian monarchy was not just British, it became the royal family of Europe. Victorian hobbies, social life and daily life. Welcome to Victorian Britain. Imagine stepping onto a cobblestone street in London, 1855. Horse-drawn buses rattle past lamplighters who are raising their torches as evening falls. Factory whistles echo in the distance. Ladies in bell-shaped skirts walk arm in arm while street children dart between carriages selling matches. This is a world of intense contrast. Industry and elegance, soot and silk, hardship and discovery. And across the country, daily life is shaped by new inventions, strict social rules, and a growing hunger for leisure. Chapter 1. Daily life for the working class. In the backstreets of industrial cities like Manchester and Liverpool, dawn meant one thing: work. Hard, relentless, exhausting work. 1. Daily routine for labourers. A typical day started around 5 a.m. Workers grabbed a quick bite, bread and tea were the norm, and headed to textile mills, factories, mines, ironworks, shipyards. Shifts ran 12 to 16 hours, 6 days a week. Inside cotton mills, machines thundered so loudly workers often couldn't hear one another. In mines, boys as young as 8 crawled in narrow tunnels pushing coal along tracks. 2. Housing. Most working-class families lived in cramped terraced houses or workers' tenements. Rooms were overcrowded, sanitation poor, and disease common. Common illnesses included cholera, typhus, tuberculosis, smallpox. Yet even in hardship, the Victorians built strong communities. Neighbours shared food, news, and stories. Chapter 2. Daily life for the middle class. The middle class exploded during the Victorian era. Clerks, teachers, shopkeepers, accountants, businessmen. Their lives were structured, orderly, and aspiring. 1. The middle-class home. A respectable family lived in a semi-detached home with a parlor, never used except for guests. A dining room. Bedrooms for daughters separate from sons. A live-in servant or maid-of-all-work. Cleanliness and discipline were moral virtues. 2. Routine. The middle-class Victorian day included breakfast at 8 a.m. Work for the father. Home education or school for the children. Afternoon calls or errands for the mother. Tea at 4 p.m. Dinner at 6 to 7 p.m. Formality ruled their lives. Chapter 3. Daily life for the upper class in country manors and London townhouses. Wealthy Victorians lived in a world of luxury and leisure. 1. Staff. A wealthy household could employ a butler, housekeeper, several maids, footmen, a governess, gardeners, cooks, coachmen. 2. Routine. Aristocrats had slow, elegant days, breakfast served in bed, visits from friends, riding, hunting, or walking the estate. Long dinners with up to 12 courses. They lived according to the season, a social calendar centered in London. Chapter 4. Victorian hobbies and leisure. Victorians loved hobbies. As working hours slowly improved, leisure time grew, and so did recreation. 1. Reading. Reading was the Victorian hobby. Families gathered each night to read aloud. Popular authors included Charles Dickens, Wilkie Collins, Arthur Conan Doyle, Charlotte Brontë, George Eliot. Serialized fiction, released weekly or monthly, caused nationwide anticipation. 2. Parlor games. The Victorian parlor was a stage for creativity. Popular games, charades, blind man's bluff, tiddlywinks, musical chairs, battledore and shuttlecock, early badminton. These games were played for hours after meals. 3. Sports and outdoor activities. The Victorian era birthed modern sport. Sports invented or formalized: football, soccer. Rules standardized in 1863. Rugby emerged from rugby school. Cricket became highly organized. Tennis, lawn tennis invented in the 1870s. Croquet, incredibly popular among women. Golf, widely played in Scotland. Upper-class Victorians loved horse riding, hunting, fishing, archery, rowing. 4. Music and instruments. The piano became a Victorian symbol. Nearly every middle-class home owned one. Music evenings, or musicales, were common entertainment. 5. Sewing, crafting and collecting. Women collected pressed flowers, shells, stamps, beetles and butterflies, decorative scrapbooks. Men collected coins, books, natural history specimens. Stamp collecting, philately, became a national obsession. The Great Exhibition in 1851. Prince Albert opened the Great Exhibition in the Crystal Palace in London. Visitors experienced steam engines, new machines, telegraphs, exotic goods, global art. It attracted over 6 million visitors. Chapter 5. Victorian social life. Victorian society was governed by strict etiquette. 1. Calling cards. Visitors left calling cards when arriving at a home. A returned card meant the visit was welcome. No return meant a subtle refusal. 2. Tea time. The afternoon tea ritual, sandwiches, pastries, biscuits, became a cornerstone of social life. 3. Balls and dances. Upper-class social life revolved around extravagant balls. Typical features: lavish gowns, waltzes, orchestras, supper rooms, stringent rules about who danced with whom. 4. Courtship. Dating did not exist. Only courtship, supervised meetings, and chaperoned walks. A fan, handkerchief, or glove could signal secret messages. 5. The London season. Aristocrats spent spring and summer in London attending opera, parliament openings, royal balls, garden parties, horse races, ascot. This was also marriage season for débutantes. Chapter 6. Victorian children. Play and daily routine. Children lived dramatically different lives depending on class. 1. Working class children. Many worked from age 5 to 10 in factories, mines, chimney sweeping, domestic service. Free time was rare, but when it existed, kids played with wooden tops, marbles, hoops, homemade toys. 2. Middle-class children. Their days were structured. Lessons with a governess, reading, piano practice, walks in the park. Toys included dolls, train sets, tin soldiers, Noah's Ark sets. 3. Upper-class children raised in nurseries, often isolated from parents except for scheduled visits. Their lives included riding lessons, dancing instruction, French and music tutors, elaborate birthday parties. Chapter 7. Free time and urban entertainment. Cities offered new forms of mass entertainment. 1. Music halls. Places like the Canterbury Music Hall offered comedy acts, singers, acrobats, dancers. Music halls were loud, bright, and beloved by all classes. 2. Theatre. Victorian theatre blossomed, featuring Shakespeare, melodramas, Gilbert and Sullivan operettas. 3. Seaside holidays. Railways made cheap travel possible. Families flocked to Brighton, Blackpool, Margate, Scarborough. Activities included donkey rides, pier shows, and bathing machines. 4. Photography. By the 1880s, photography became a hobby. Victorians loved portrait photography and collected carte de visite, small photo cards shared socially like trading cards. Chapter 8. Moral values and etiquette. Victorian society valued modesty, hard work, duty, politeness, sobriety, family honor. Etiquette books guided everything, from how to walk to how to hold a teacup. Chapter 9. Sunday. The Victorian day of rest. Sunday was sacred. Working-class people dressed in their best clothes to attend church. Afterward, families gathered for a roast dinner, walks, reading the Bible, visiting relatives. It was the only true rest day for most workers. Chapter 10. The changing daily life of late Victorians. By the 1880s-90s, improvements transformed daily life. Gas lighting, electric lighting, manual pumping, indoor plumbing, street horses, bicycles, early motor cars. Newspapers became cheap. Literacy rose dramatically. Life grew more comfortable, especially for the middle class. The complete roundup of Victorian history. And so, as we step back from the factories and parlours, from the grand music halls and shadowed alleyways, from the palaces of queens and the humble cottages of miners, we begin to see the Victorian world not as a distant chapter in a dusty book, but as a vast, living tapestry. A tapestry woven from contrasts. On one thread, the clatter of machines, the hiss of steam engines, the brilliance of new inventions that would change the course of human history. On another, the rustle of silk gowns, glittering royal balls, and the quiet rituals of afternoon tea. One thread carries the laughter of children chasing hoops along cobbled streets. Another bears the cries of chimney sweeps and factory workers toiling from dawn to dusk. It was an age of discovery, and an age of hardship. An era defined by the iron rails that cut across the countryside, by telegraph lines whispering messages through copper veins, by the rise of photography, organized sport, and mass entertainment. A time when travel became faster, knowledge spread further, and dreams, whether scientific, artistic, or political, grew larger than ever before. It was also a century shaped by people, real men and women whose lives left marks still visible today. We met Queen Victoria herself, the resolute monarch who reigned for more than 6 decades. A queen shaped by personal tragedy, sustained by duty, and bound to a sprawling empire. Around her grew a family of princes and princesses whose marriages tied together the royal houses of Europe. We followed London's police as they patrolled gaslit streets haunted by the legendary crimes of the age, from grave robbers to the chilling mystery of Jack the Ripper. We saw the courts and prisons of the Victorian justice system, revealing both its brutality and its desire to reform society. We explored homes across every class. The smoky kitchens of working families, the polished parlours of the middle class, and the grand estates where wealth crafted entire worlds of comfort and leisure. We saw how Victorians played croquet on summer lawns, reading novels by lamplight, performing charades, collecting stamps, sewing intricate crafts, or venturing to the seaside as the railways opened the coast to all. We watched children at work and at play, saw their lessons, their toys, their traditions. We joined street vendors, servants, factory hands, scholars, inventors, and aristocrats as each carved out their place in a society both rigidly structured and constantly evolving. We witnessed the rise of new technology. The bicycle, the steamship, the locomotive, the telegraph, the camera. And along the way we met the inventors who dreamed these creations into existence, people who dared to imagine what never existed before. And through it all, we discovered something profound. The Victorian era was not simply a time of corsets and top hats, nor of black soot and strict manners. It was the bridge between the old world and the modern one. A world where tradition met innovation, where morality met ambition, where struggle met opportunity, where empire met identity, where science met superstition, where progress met poverty, where humanity, in all its brilliance and all its failings, took a bold and irrevocable step forward. When Queen Victoria passed in 1901, the mournful tolling of bells marked more than the end of a monarch's life. It marked the closing of a chapter, the end of an age defined by change, contradiction, and creation. But the echoes of her era live on today in our cities, our laws, our culture, our technology, and even our daily routines. The Victorians built the world we now inhabit. Their inventions power it. Their stories color it. Their struggles warn it. Their achievements inspire it. And so, as we leave behind the gaslit streets and steam-filled stations, the parlors and palaces, the laughter and lamplight, we carry with us a final truth. The Victorian era is not merely history. It is the foundation beneath our feet, the shadow behind our modern world, and the spark that ignited the future. Thank you for journeying through Victorian history. Until next time, step carefully. For every street, every invention, every tradition you see today may have begun in the remarkable age we've just explored.